Welcome back to another episode of Football Frenemies. We are here with the final conference preview. We've already taken in week 0, and now the real football has started. We look forward to week 1, where all of our teams are going to be in action. Today we're going to talk Big Ten football. This is where tool time across the way from me and myself. This is what we care about, Big Ten country, baby. It's all about those Maryland Terrapins, those USC Trojans. That's Big Ten football, baby. The Rutgers Scarlet Knights. No, it's actually all about Michigan and Ohio State, but we do love all things Big Ten. So today we're going to do some predictions. We're going to talk through some of the class of the Big Ten, who's for real, who's pretending, and we'll have our final preview today. Finally here, the preseason. It's the real season. That's where we're at now. So let's just start with before we get into Michigan, Ohio State. I got to go back to my superlatives because I'm telling you, I said that the SEC was the best conference last pod. I'm telling you right now, the Big Ten is by far the most entertaining conference, which I wouldn't have said that in some years past. But the storylines are so juicy. You have the future with teams like I've mentioned, USC, UCLA, now Oregon and Washington, Cody's Oregon Ducks. I am looking at teams like not just Ohio State looking to reclaim their Big Ten crown, or Michigan defending it. I'm looking at the Iowa Hawkeyes, the race to 325. I'm looking at the last year of the Big Ten West. How can we let that beautiful division die? It's going to die, and I'm going to enjoy at least one more season of it. The storylines are going to capture audiences. The ugly football, the beautiful football, all of it. It's going to be perfect this year. And so the best conference for entertainment value is by far the Big Ten this year. Cody, what is your Big Ten conference superlative this year?
It's not that. That's for sure. Because there are 2 real contenders, and that's about it. To me, the Big Ten is what everyone thinks every presidential election will be, and then it ends up being what every presidential election will be. Is all we hear of everything is how this candidate is coming from out of the woodwork, and don't sleep on this person, or you never know what this person might bring, and there's all these debates, and there's all these, videos and talk shows or whatnot about all these candidates on who we might think actually step up. And then what happens is the majority person who's been the majority the entire time wins the candidacy from that party, and they go on, and then it's time for the actual election. Well, maybe the Libertarian Party will come up this year, or the Tea Party, or, something like that. And then it just ends up being Democrat versus Republican, and who was just the most popular between those two, and then someone wins. At the end of the day, there's all these things you could talk about beforehand, which honestly right now, I won't lie, I'm buying into the excitement of talking about it, but we both know come the time of the game, OSU and Michigan will be playing for the right to go to the Big Ten Championship, in which the winner will win by 50-plus points and be on their way to the playoff.
Well, I might trigger you here a little bit, and we're going to get into this later in the show, but there are a lot of prominent media voices. One in particular, Josh Pate, who believes strongly in the Penn State Nittany Lions, who he has them in the playoff. So I've seen them in the playoff quite a few times, and so I would say
Josh Pate also strongly believed in Texas A&M last year, and let's see how that went. So
I'm just saying he's not the only one, but there's a lot of people that do believe in Penn State. I tend to think that they will probably hit that 10-2, but I think it's possible that they there's that scenario people keep throwing out there: 11-1, 11-1, 11-1 for Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State. I do think that's possible. I'm not sure I want to say it's probable, but I wouldn't be shocked. So I think it's more of a 3-horse race this year than last year. Okay. I don't respect anyone out of the West. Wisconsin is getting a lot of love. We'll talk about them, but I gotta tell you, name another team in any other conference that you will be counting their points because you want to know if the coach has to fire his son. I mean, this is drama on, operatic levels that is, I just love it. So whether it's, mediocre football played by the Iowa Hawkeyes, or even, go down to the minute details of, like, Indiana. Can they get more than 2 conference wins? That's big-time stakes because Tom Allen's got to keep his job. So I think the Big Ten is going to be super fun, even if maybe it's only going to come down to 1, 2, or 3 teams. We'll see. But let's get into
Do you think if Iowa doesn't get the points that their offense requires, do you think that Kirk Ferentz will spank his son the way Michael Scott spanked his nephew in The Office because he didn't learn how to be more professional at his job?
So that story will never come out, but 100% that will happen behind closed doors. On Brian's way out, he will get the spanking from his father, and then hopefully he'll learn his lesson from that. So, yes, that is why I'm watching Iowa even more than usual this year. And I think Wisconsin's very interesting. For a team of their history to go air raid, it's like it's kind of like what Michigan did back in the Rich Rod days. And I'm just so curious, can it work? Because I feel like it was so dysfunctional with Michigan. If it doesn't work again for Wisconsin, I'll be like, okay, maybe that's just not something that you can flip a switch. But if they do it, then I can say, well, maybe Michigan they just sucked. So, you want to talk about the state of the rivalry. So this is kind of where our actual experience comes into play. We haven't talked too much rivalry yet. What are your thoughts, or what do you want to cover in the state of the rivalry aspect of this podcast?
I mean, it's in a place that we haven't been in over 2 decades. Like, there has been moments since Jim Tressel where Michigan has won, right? 2011, they won. 2003, they won. But this is the first time in over 2 decades where it is very clear, not that you can just make the argument, that it is clear that Michigan is in control. It's very clear that Michigan is in control. It's not like they found a way to get Ohio State once. Can they do it again? They have taken control of the rivalry. Ryan Day already has more losses against Michigan than Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer. That's huge. That's huge.
Do you think that's a Ryan Day issue, or do you think that's just he's playing better teams? Because, I mean, let's face it, Urban Meyer won 7 games against just completely underperforming Michigan squads.
I do think it's a little bit of both. I do think Michigan is at their best that they've been. However, I do think the big difference is for a while, I think Harbaugh was trying to let's go back to 2016, 2018, Michigan's best chances against Urban. I think Harbaugh was trying a little bit too much in those games, while Urban Meyer just looked at the game and said, he just watched the way the game was going. He said, whatever it takes, we're going to do. I think that flip-flopped. I think Ryan Day has tried to be the smarter coach. I think he's tried to be smarter than everyone else in the room, while Harbaugh has just looked at the game and said, okay, let's go for it. I mean, look at this past year. Ohio State selling out in the box, so Harbaugh said, okay, throw it deep. And then the moment throwing it deep opened up the running lanes, and Donovan Edwards put a dagger in the game. It was the same thing in 2021, the first year. Harbaugh, stuck to his game plan, just what Michigan was good at, and then he literally noticed, okay, they cannot stop Hassan Haskins. Let's run him 40 times in the second half. And they did that. And I think that's been Ryan Day's biggest thing, is I don't think he has just necessarily leaned into what made his teams great. I think Ryan Day was trying to prove that he was the better coach and the smarter coach, while Harbaugh just said, I'm just going to go win this game. We're going to be who we are, and then we're going to make adjustments. That's what Urban Meyer did. Urban Meyer was who he was, and then he made adjustments as those games go on. While Ryan Day's adjustments have proven to be either horrible or non-existent, because the second halves against Michigan the past 2 years have been horrendous.
They do seem like Ohio State has lost their composure, which I think is maybe a product of the chemistry or culture or whatever Ryan Day is doing. But in the end, Ryan Day has lost to, I believe, 0 Big Ten teams not named Michigan.
Correct.
He's been to a national title game. He's been to the playoffs. Was it 2 or 3 times now? 3 times?
3 times now. 3 of his 4. There's only been one season he wasn't in the playoff.
2021, right, when they went to the Rose Bowl and won. It's a crazy amount of success. Obviously, it's a high bar for him. I'm very curious to see how this year plays out. I think going back to 2018 and 2016, you pointed out. So 2016, I think Michigan should have won that game. In fact, I still believe that they did win that game with that JT spot. But even then, removing that controversial play, I think Michigan wins that game going away if they had a competent quarterback, which is just necessary at this level. If you're going to be a Big Ten champion, you have to have a competent quarterback, and Wilton Speight was not that. You go to 2018, they didn't have a competent defensive coordinator. I'm kind of getting some Don Brown vibes from Jim Knowles, I got to be honest. The big plays that he has given up against Michigan, against Georgia, it just seems like there's this sell out to get the quarterback, and if you don't, well, too bad. I guess there's another 75-yard touchdown. So we'll see what his adjustments are. He does have a load of 5 stars that he can use at his disposal, so maybe it's not going to matter. But now that I think that Jim Harbaugh does have his battle station fully operational, now I think you're going to see more even battles where Jim Tressel he had a loaded hand, and Michigan was scrambling a bit. Urban Meyer especially was beating up Michigan while Michigan had their hands tied behind their backs a bit just by their own hubris. And now that it's a fair fight, we're going to see just a tougher standard for Ryan Day to uphold, because he's expected to never lose to Michigan. And right now, Michigan is entering the season ranked number 2 and expected to be one of the best teams in the country. So it's a high bar. This year we got Ohio State coming to the Big House, and I don't even know who the quarterback's going to be. We'll see. It's for me, a Michigan fan, it's probably the best period of the rivalry I can remember, because I pretty much have only known how could we possibly beat Ohio State. They have the better players, they have the better coaches, and now that it's flipping, we are kind of having that Ohio State experience of, let's never let this flip back the other way, because losing is the worst.
Yeah, it sucks. It's one of those things. It's so weird how you could go from, how many games was it? Was it 17 games where Ohio State had only lost one time?
I believe
17
so.
Games where Ohio State only lost once, and then all of a sudden, because you got to remember, even though Michigan has won twice, when this game comes around, it will have been 4 years since Ohio State won, because of the COVID year, because it got canceled that year, which is still honestly one of the most bizarre things to think about, that the game was actually canceled one year. That still hasn't actually sought in as reality with me. The fact that it couldn't be played one year, that's nuts.
Just the what if of what the multiple timelines. If that game is played, Michigan was in free fall, and there's most likely a obliteration where
you would have fired Harbaugh. I'm
Harbaugh
convinced.
Doesn't return.
I'm convinced he doesn't return.
Have 2 straight Big Ten championships. It's just crazy how those dominoes happen to fall. There's a reality out there where that's the case, and Harbaugh ended up back in the NFL somewhere.
Yeah.
So
I think another thing too is I think Harbaugh finally started to get his coordinators right. I think that was a really, really big deal. Over the last 2 years, he's really gotten the coordinators right. Wow. Honestly, I feel like before 2021, the only coordinator he 100% really got right was probably DJ Durkin right out the gate, even though he might be a murderer. But he was that team in 2015 started trending up because of him. And then since then, he kind of never really hit a home run on either the offensive coordinator or the defensive coordinator. But I think the last 2 years, he definitely started to, because I think Sharon Moore is probably the best offensive coordinator he's had since he's been there.
Well, I think his impact is on the offensive line, where the offensive line has been the engine of the offense. And once they got the offensive line figured out, they immediately won the Big Ten. They were able to do everything they wanted to do with Harbaugh's offense of smashing the ball down the opponent's throats. So, yeah, I think Sharon Moore is easily the most influential hire that Harbaugh has made. And going back to the defensive coordinator, we had McDonald and now we have Minter. Both came from the Ravens. Both are running the same defense. It's almost like you view them as kind of the same coach, even though they're the one guy, McDonald, went back to the NFL.
Yeah.
With Minter, we feel like he's basically the same guy, and he's doing a fantastic job as well. I think.
They're running a straight up NFL defense. You could tell in the second half when the pressure is on. When OSU was in their scripted plays in the first half, C.J. Stroud was doing enough. It helps that he had the talent at wide receiver that he had. But in the second half, all of a sudden, me and my buddies are sitting there watching the game wondering, why are you throwing the ball just straight at Michigan players? All the second half, it felt like he was throwing it. But I think it's a straight-up NFL scheme. They're started to decipher what Ohio State was doing, and they mixed up coverages. They mixed up who drops, who rushes, and I think it just completely overwhelmed Ohio State because Michigan was just superior, not only in the strength of the defense, but the scheme. I mean, Ohio State went from that offense where C.J. Stroud was the leading Heisman candidate going into the Michigan game. He was. To Michigan held him to 3 points at home in the second half. That's
You can say that again. It'll never get old.
The odds of that happening, honestly, were pretty low, but at the same time, it was decisive. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a fluke thing. It was decisive. The way that
you're going to get disowned by your own fan base because I've heard that it was only 5 plays.
Ohio State. The only time we threatened to put the ball in the end zone was the play where we were trying to find Cade Stover deep, and Michigan player went and broke it up. That's the only time we threatened the end zone in the second half. People can say 5 plays all they want. How often do we talk about how 3 plays is all it takes to really decide a football game, right?
Yeah.
And so if there's 5 plays, then that's decisive.
It's well decided.
5 plays. Yeah, that's very decided. If we can look at 5 plays and say that changed the game, that's decisive. That's not it's only that made the game.
It's a game of inches, and those 5 plays went for 60 to 70 yards each.
They did, yeah.
So
I got to just one point because I remember you said it earlier. It's so funny how things have flip-flopped. Just how, you said, you're talking about Michigan had Don Brown, and now we had Jim Knowles. The only thing that has made me so worried about Jim Knowles the whole time was he had to scheme things for a bunch of 3 stars and maybe a couple 4 stars, right? So when you have that kind of defense, you have to have a scheme. And when in the Big 12, everyone runs these basic offenses, that are very much just, it's all read options. It's spread everyone out, and it's just try and find the open gaps, right? Jim Knowles was able to find the schemes that were covering the gaps. Well, he came to the Big Ten, and now all of a sudden when you find it's about strength and physicality and the quality of your players, you found out his scheme got exposed against Michigan and Georgia. So now the scheme needs, like, what he needs to not do, it cannot be about the scheme. It has to be about the players that you have. One of the biggest things I talk about with coaches in my soccer world all the time is how us as high school coaches, it's not club. You don't pick your players to fit a specific system, right? You walk in, it's what you have, and it's more like international soccer. Who you have is who you have. Well, Jim Knowles didn't recruit the guys that we have right now on defense. He didn't recruit them. He didn't pick them. He has what he has, and he's got to find a way to use that talent the best he can, because I do believe since 2019, Ohio State has the best defensive talent that we've had since the 2019 year with Chase Young and Okuda and Sean Wade and all those guys. I think it's our best talent. It doesn't mean it's going to be our best defense, but it is our best talent. And I'll kind of get to that a little bit more here later on.
Well, go ahead and get into it. Give Ohio State fans some hope. Why is this year going to flip the rivalry back? What's going to be different?
Okay, the number one thing is the return of the Silver Bullets. The return of the Silver Bullets.
Because to me, that sounds like gibberish.
Yeah, so the Silver Bullets, think back to 90s, 2000s, and early 2010s. When you think about defense, Ohio State was known for great defensive line play and linebackers that just overwhelmed. I mean, thinking A.J. Hawk and Bobby Carpenter and James Laurinaitis, all those kind of players. Then think about, why am I already blanking on who the linebacker, I don't know why I'm blanking on his name. Linebacker who went to the Steelers, got paralyzed for a little bit.
Shazier?
Yeah, Ryan Shazier and Raekwon McMillan. We had all those linebackers and we had defensive linemen to go through it, and we used to just overwhelm teams. Like, that's what Ohio State defense was. You had so much pressure on quarterbacks and running backs and offensive lines that teams were just overwhelmed. We will have the best defensive line talent that we've had in a while. Like, we're going to be starting 4 juniors this year. JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer are going to be running the edges, and you'll have Mike Hall and Tyleek Williams running up the defensive tackles. And so the fact that we've got the most, not just experience we've had in a while, but it's a class that came in together, they've grown together, they've worked together. There's a lot of chemistry where you can move those guys around a lot. Tommy Eichenberg is probably the best linebacker that we've had in a while. And there's a couple young gun linebackers that Ohio State fans are dying to see. One of them is CJ Hicks. He was a 5-star recruit last year in the 2022 class. And people are dying for CJ Hicks to get his chance to break into the starting lineup for the Buckeyes. And if we can get to where the front line can create lots of pressure, where we can clog up running lanes, we can move the line, we can put pressure on the quarterback, we've got a decent secondary. I think Ebogason that we got from Ole Miss was a huge transfer, because I do think Denzel Burke is a quality cornerback. I don't think he's these BIA cornerbacks that we've had, but Denzel Burke is still quality. And so the fact that Burke can now be the number 2 cornerback on our team, I think is a big deal. And I think we've got safeties that can finally stop leaving open gaps. Jahad Carter was a transfer we got from Syracuse, who is just supposed to be the positional IQ safety who dissects what's going on, and he's always in position to make sure you don't get beat over the top, while a young kid named Sonny Styles, who's from Central Ohio, is a sophomore. They're saying he's likely going to be starting. He's kind of the free roaming safety who's an athletic freak. He was a 3-sport athlete in high school. He was a great basketball player. He won state championships in football and basketball. And we're hoping Sonny Styles can kind of be that athletic freak in the secondary. The big thing is can Jim Knowles just identify his talent and put them in the right place instead of thinking he has to out-scheme teams. You don't have to do that when you have 4 and 5 stars in the entire defense. You do not have to out-scheme people in college. And so I think if the return of the Silver Bullet comes, Ohio State's offense is OSU's offense. Is it going to be what it's been the last 2 years with C.J. Stroud? No, but I also don't think it's going to be as much of a one-man show. I think our receiver room is just ridiculous going into this next year. We're solid at tight end. And I do think the one player that everyone keeps forgetting about on Ohio State is Travion Henderson. I do think, like you watch preview videos for anyone, nobody talks about Henderson. Let's not forget he was the top running back recruit in 2021, and he was a 1,000-yard rusher as a freshman when he didn't even start until the 4th game of the season. So if Henderson can stay healthy, if whatever quarterback we have comes in, just be a distributor. Just get the ball in the hands of Harrison and Ibuka, for crying out loud. And if the return of the silver bullets come, I very much think Ohio State can return to prominence and be the team that they want to. But there is multiple moving parts that we all need to happen at once instead of just getting one of them. But I do think the major key is the return of the silver bullets and Ohio State getting back to their roots. Because think about it. When Ohio State was great during the 2000s and when they won the title, there was a great running back that led the way. Zeke Elliott, Carlos Hyde, Beanie Wells, Antonio Pittman, Maurice Claret. What a name to bring out of nowhere. Ohio State's got to get back to its roots. When we started this dominant run in the 2000s, it's time for Ohio State to go back to what we were. That's what we need to do.
So I would agree that getting back to a dominant defense, if you go back to 2014, 2015, you had these defensive lines that, as a Michigan fan, I was afraid of them because I knew that my quarterback wasn't going to be able to find someone down the field because there was a Bosa that was going to kill them. And then you get, a little later on, you're into Chase Young. I'm not there yet with Tui Moluau. Maybe we'll see what Jack Sawyer does. I think he was misused last year as their hybrid linebacker rush end. So I'm curious, but he's definitely not established yet. If let's say it this way, if they are going to get back to those standards, they were the best in the Big Ten at pretty much every level of the defense, especially the D-line. And I think of the secondary where, you had seems like endless first-round picks. Mm-hmm. Some of them busted for my Lions, but they still were great in college. So let's go D-line. Rank the top three, the big three, Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State D-lines, just going into the season.
Yeah, so I'm trying to take stock of where I think they are right now. And I don't think it will end this way, but just based on who's coming back, I'm going to put Penn State number 1.
Ooh, there is some people supporting that. As a fan of a running team, Penn State I think is vulnerable up the middle of their defensive line. With they don't have the big bodies like Michigan does, or Ohio State's kind of gotten a little bit bigger in the middle.
Yeah,
but
Penn State does
got
lack
the edge
that.
Guys.
Penn State does lack that Midwestern big body in that
nose tackle that you can't move. But they've got the guys that can get to the quarterback on the edge and at linebacker. So I see that, but I think I would rank it Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, but I do think it's close.
See, I just have Penn State and Ohio State flip-flopped. I do think Ohio State could be number 1 by the end of the season, but I'm not trying to go based on hypotheticals. I'm trying to go based on where the season ended and who you've got coming back. I'm not gonna try. Like I said, obviously my prediction was going based off hypotheticals, but if I'm gonna give you a ranking, I'm gonna give you a ranking of where I think things are right now.
All right, what about linebacker?
I think that's Michigan. Was it Junior Colson? Is that his name? It's best linebacker.
Yeah.
It's been best linebacker in the Big Ten, and I don't think it's close. And then I think Michigan's just got good balance. I couldn't name you other linebackers for them this year, but is Barrett
same
is
guys
Barrett
they
still
were
there?
last year? Yeah,
Barrett's
he's
still
a
there?
60-year guy. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
That is a man with 2 children, a wife, a mortgage, and probably some gray hairs and a receding hairline at this point.
Good Lord.
I think almost you could just put them across the board. I think tied for 1. I think they all are phenomenal. I think Eichenberg is really good for Ohio State. I don't know. Maybe it's my how is he in pass coverage? Because I just have a feeling that he could be taken advantage of.
That's the problem. He's not. That's why fans are clamoring for C.J. Hicks, because he's the big linebacker that's got some speed. So the best example of how Ohio State are sick and tired of their linebackers in coverage is go back to the 2020 championship, watching Tough Borland matched up on Devontae Smith. And we are just sick and tired of watching that. And so Eichenberg, I'm not confident. Because there was a couple times in Georgia where Stetson Bennett's big passes where they got their speedy receivers on linebackers. And so that's why I'm dying for C.J. Hicks to get in, because I think he's at least got the speed to pace with them. He's not going to close gaps, but he might be able to pace with them at least. So that way it's a contested catch, right? It's not just wide open down the middle of the field. So yeah, we've got to stop allowing our linebackers to have to be traded. I mean, occasionally that has to happen, right? Occasionally they might get you on a play or two, but with OSU it felt like it's happening way too much. And I don't trust Eichenberg. Eichenberg, his strength is he needs to be at the line. He needs to be the linebacker that can clog running lanes and help neutralize that. And then if there's pass situations, as great as he is, unless we're rushing him on pass or unless he's covering only 5 yards of space, I'd say get him off the field and let other guys. Like I'm not very high on Steel Chambers, but Steel Chambers is a former running back. If we're gonna have a running back drop into, if we're gonna have a linebacker drop into coverage, why would it not be Chambers?
Former or returning, I should say, second team All-American Tommy Eichenberg. Get him off the field. Last but not least, secondaries. Give me your rankings.
To me, this is the toughest one. For me, it's tough because Ohio State's secondary is transfers. So I do think we have the best unit on paper, but I'm not going to give them the benefit of the doubt when they haven't played together yet. I'm going to go Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State.
I think that's a pretty defensible position. Penn State with Kobe King. A lot of people have him pegged as maybe the best corner in the country. And Michigan has got a gaping hole right now at the second corner spot. They've also got a transfer that they seem to like, but you haven't seen it yet. So it's kind of same thing with
Will Johnson's good, though.
What are they going to do? Will Johnson, I think people are like Kobe King. I think I'd take Will Johnson over anybody else, and he's only a sophomore at this point. He's banged up, so we'll see if he can be healthy going into the start of the season. All right, so that's enough about Ohio State. Let me tell you what it's going to take for Michigan to do it again for the third straight year. The reason I like Michigan this year so much is the returning production. They were able to do it last year and do it emphatically, and this year they return, I believe, the fifth most returning production in the entire country. That's number one in the Big Ten. And they do return the most important position, which is quarterback. The big thing for J.J. McCarthy is this is the first time he's been able to have a healthy offseason and be able to get all of the number one reps. That's something I maybe want to pick your brain on because Ohio State hasn't named a starter yet. So whoever it's going to be probably doesn't have that perfect chemistry down yet. There was times last year where, man, the chemistry between J.J. and the receivers was terrible. And lucky for us, they kind of figured it out at the end of the season against Ohio State. But before that, it was pretty rough. And I think we're going to see more of Ohio State, Purdue, J.J. McCarthy than Illinois or Maryland, J.J. McCarthy. And that's going to make for a really fun season. Yeah. Not only that, of course, Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, that killer offensive line, and a defense that should be top 10 in the nation, if not top 5. So this is a dominant team with a quarterback that has top, we'll say, first-round upside in the NFL draft. And it's at this point, it's just up to development. Can he take another step? I think he does. And I don't see really any huge gaping holes on this team. Obviously, we don't have a wide receiver room like in Ohio State, but we haven't had that. And if you go back to the last time we did have a wide receiver room that was overly flowing with talent, they didn't know how to use them. So I'm not terribly worried about it. I obviously wish that they had some first-round talent in the wide receiver room, but I think the guys they have can do their jobs well enough. They're seniors, they're fifth-year guys, and then they have some freshmen coming up, interspersed in there. So I feel great about Michigan. You're welcome to try to bring me down a peg because it's hard. I'm feeling really good.
See, for me, it's not even that I'm trying to bring you down a peg. I'm just trying to be realistic on a couple things that I think there is a chance it could happen. Not that it's going to happen, not that I just fully believe it, but if you do look at the history of college football, though, there is multiple times where teams who have brought back nearly everyone and bring back all these production, it's very rare that those teams live up to expectations. It's very difficult to do that. I think the first one, think about Alabama in 2010. They basically brought back that national championship winning team from 2009. They basically brought that team back. They had 3 losses that year in the regular season. 3 losses.
Give me as many examples as you can think of off the top of your head.
Teams that returned and didn't have it. I mean, remember 2012 USC when everyone was like, look at everything USC is bringing back this year. Everyone was so high on USC. Didn't they go 8-4 where they lost to Notre Dame and watched Manti Te'o go to the national championship game that year? There's plenty of times. Yeah. 2015 Ohio State.
That was
literally
the team I was
brought back
the
same team. And, they didn't manage to really do anything with it at all. 2019 Alabama, now to be fair, they ran into Joe Burrow and LSU, but still, look at that 2019 Alabama team. That just shows you how close the margins are. You can bring back everybody and you never know what might happen one season. So when you bring everyone back, in college football, it's proven just how tough it is to do it. I mean, even with all the great success that Alabama's had, it's still rare that they were back-to-back champions. They did it one year. They did it one time, 2011, 2012. It's so tough to be back-to-back. Georgia, that's so rare that Georgia did it. And look at Georgia. They were a missed field goal away. And not to mention, they almost choked that Missouri game early in the season, too. So yes, it's so tough to do it. And what I want to put on notice, not to scare you, just be realistic, but Michigan does have to be careful of what OSU fans know as the Purdue syndrome, where you go on the road to this team that you never even put yourself on upset alert for. And all of a sudden, things just go wrong because when you're the hunted team, every single team thinks they're going to make their season off you. So every single team on Michigan's schedule thinks they're going to make their season by beating Michigan. That was Urban Meyer's kryptonite. The kryptonite for Urban Meyer was not the great teams he played. His kryptonite was the mediocre teams that he played against. Look at 2014, Virginia Tech. Now, they did manage to still win the title that year, but, look at that Virginia. That team went 6-6 in the ACC. Come on. That Virginia Tech team was terrible. And it was at home. It was in Columbus. So I do think that's one of the things that Michigan's just got to be careful of. You have to know that every single team is going to come at you. And I think it was Cody on Jonesy for Sports that made a good point of that Maryland game is sandwiched in a scary spot.
The Maryland game is the one we've got circled as probably the one to watch through your hands, over your face, because it's going to get ugly. The one thing that I'll push back on, those teams that you're describing were teams that had basically achieved their goals, and Michigan has still fallen short. Yes, they have won the Big Ten, but to lose to TCU like they did, a team that they know they should, there should have been no way they lost that game, and they found a way to do it. And I think that they know that their mission's not complete. I still think they're going to be hungry. And the amount of competition that there is on this team, I don't think you're going to see guys dogging it. I think that they're going to make every rep, every snap count, because if they don't, there are guys right behind them that are wanting to get to the league, and you can't get to the league if you don't play. So I still think that motivation shouldn't be an issue. They've got a lot of chips on their shoulder. They got this Harbaugh crap with the suspension, and I think overall that motivation shouldn't be an issue. But I do think there are going to be some trappish games for sure.
There always will be. At the same time, these are 19, 20, and 21-year-old kids. So you never know what could just be going on. Because think about OSU. In 2017. OSU went 10-2, won the Big Ten 11-2, and so we didn't accomplish what we wanted to do. We didn't get to the playoff like we thought that team was supposed to. They were preseason number 2 overall. And it dropped games to Oklahoma, and then we dropped that Iowa game, which that's just another example. Going to a place like Kinnick Stadium, and all of a sudden, like I said, Ohio State was just coming off that Penn State game in 2017. The number 2 versus number 6, the Saquon Barkley returned the kickoff to start the game. OSU comes back, and everyone's like, this is the Ohio State that we know can win a championship game, and gets railroaded by Iowa and Nate Stanley, of all people. Like
yep.
Embarrassingly. So when you're – it is a grind. Regardless of what it is, when you're the top team, it's just a grind. Like, look what Clemson, what year was it, 2017, 2018, when they lost to Pitt at home? When you're the hunted team, it's just a grind. And last year, Michigan was the defending Big Ten champions, but everyone still thought Ohio State was still the team last year until the game. Mm-hmm. Like, look at all the rankings. Ohio State was always still ahead of Michigan until Michigan won. This year, it's different. You are now ranked higher than Ohio State. Every single outlet besides Las Vegas is picking Michigan to currently win the Big Ten. So if you're listening right now and you don't bet on Michigan right now, you're insane, because they're not favored to win the Big Ten, according to Las Vegas. And it's so much different when you're hunted, because teams aren't foaming at teams. Ohio State's Ohio State, but teams are foaming at the mouth to get at Michigan right now. And one team that, even though I do think it should be, like, you got Nebraska early seasons, and the reason why I think you got to be careful is because this kid Jeff Sims, who transferred in, all they have really is Colorado. Besides Colorado, they don't really have a big game, and I think this kid Jeff Sims might be watering at the mouth to prove himself against Michigan. And it'll probably be a night game, that game, because I don't think it'll be the big noon kickoff game that week. It'll probably be a night game, and there's always players and teams that foam at the mouth to make themselves know. 2018 was, Moore, the receiver from Purdue that was dying to
he was
make his name felt. So
awesome
he was. And so that's what Michigan will get from people this year. You will get their undoubted best shot, because teams will make their season off it. So I don't think that's going to happen. I just think that is what Michigan has to be careful of, is the Purdue syndrome.
Well, we'll end with this. As a Michigan fan, watching Ohio State in the offseason, it seems to me that we've got a little bit of a quarterback conundrum, and maybe an offensive line that could take a step or a step and a half or two back. So what are your thoughts on maybe entering the game with a quarterback that's probably not going to be as good as C.J. Stroud, with an offensive line that might not protect like they did for C.J. Stroud?
See,
do you think it's handled well?
I think it's been fine. I've done a little bit of research, and the ironic thing is, since Tressel has stepped in, the best seasons have actually come when quarterbacks are playing for their first year. Like, Craig Krenzel was a first-year starter when they won the national championship. J.T. Barrett and, then Cardale Jones, they were first-year starters when they did that. Under Ryan Day, the best season was Justin Fields, and he was a first-time starter. And then, honestly, even with how 2022 went, I think Ohio State had an easier season. I actually think Ohio State was better in 2021 than we were in 2022, and C.J. Stroud was a first-year starter. The only exception is 2006, Troy Smith. That's really the only exception that you'll find. Terrell Pryor's best year, when he was the incumbent starter, was 2009, when they got to that Rose Bowl and they had that monster upset, when that was like Oregon was really cruising. And so Ohio State does have good history of their quarterbacks performing in the first year that they're starter. And it's not like I do think Kyle McCord will start week one. they might split time evenly, but I think Kyle McCord walks out as the starter. And
Well, let me bring you back. I know it's not a first-year scenario, but to 2015, where in 2014 you have JT Barrett, who leads the team for the majority of the season, gets injured, and then Cardale Jones takes over for the last 3 games, wins a national title. And in 2015, I think Urban handled that quarterback competition about as poorly as humanly possible.
yes,
And then in 2015, neither one of them takes off. And the most in my opinion, the most talented Ohio State team I've ever seen did not win their own conference, did not make the playoffs, and they should have been playing for the national title because I think that team
they were the best team that year. It's not even
was
close.
Incredible. Mm-hmm. And they lost in the most incredible game against Michigan State, where I still cannot wrap my mind around how you lose to Michigan State when you have Ezekiel Elliott, you have
Zeke had 8 carries that game too. So
I mean, some of those wide receivers are guys that have records in the NFL now.
Yep.
This team was stocked, and they couldn't beat a Michigan State team who had lost Connor Cook, so they had their backup quarterback. Mm-hmm. So are you worried at all that this kind of not naming a starter and giving him the reps to get him, in a flow, or do you just think it's just going to get figured out? Because this is a tough schedule for Ohio State.
It is a tough schedule this year, but I think it'll get figured out because the difference between those is JT Barrett started 12 games and was 5th in the Heisman voting. Then Cardale Jones went and smacked Wisconsin, beat Bama, beat Oregon, and won a national championship. So both of them were probably kind of a little bit petty as to why they weren't the starter. Why is it not me? Compared to neither Kyle McCord or Devin Brown has ever been established at the starter, and they're trying to prove. So I think whenever they go in, they're trying to prove that I'm the guy. They have something to show, while Cardale and JT were look at me. Why am I not the starter? So I think the attitude based on that right there is completely different. It's a completely different situation, even though we're trying to find the starter. We're literally we're trying to figure out who's next. And in 2015, they weren't trying to figure out who's next. They're trying to figure out who do they have now. And I do think part of that kind of looks through a glass window, because I think Cardale should have gone pro after that. He was getting potential first round grades, and
that's crazy.
I think he should have left and taken that opportunity. Although ironically, I do think they made the right decision at the end of the time. JT was coming off an injury. Cardale was looking great. They should have just said, you know what, Cardale Jones is the starter. But we all know JT Barrett was like a son to Urban Meyer. And because of that, Joe Burrow rode the bench. But I'm not bitter about that at all. So.
All right, well, let's move on to the trial of Penn State. You want to talk about whether or not Penn State is legit, if they're going to actually push to win the Big Ten, to make the playoffs. And whatever, you just tell me what side you want to take, and I will attempt to take the other side to offer some balance.
Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to ask you a question.
Go for it.
What would you argue is the 3 most important, I'm going to say, position groups? Sometimes it could just be one position. Sometimes it could be a position group. But for you, what is the 3 most important position groups that you need to be not a Big Ten contender, a national champion contender?
Okay, so you need the quarterback.
Okay.
You need a edge rusher. And the third one, I kind of going back and forth. I'll just say left tackle, because at the elite level, if your quarterback is getting hassled the whole time, you need that left tackle to take out the other team's best edge rusher. So quarterback, edge rusher, and left tackle.
Okay, so let's talk about those 3 things for Penn State right now. They've got the edge rusher.
Yes.
No question about it. The left tackle, I think, is fine.
Some people have him as the top left tackle in college football.
You think so? Really?
He
maybe
was
I haven't
injured
looked
a
it up,
lot
but I just haven't
year,
seen that one.
But he's been pegged as a first-round talent.
Okay, so they've got a first-round talent at edge rush. They've got a first-round talent at left tackle, and they've got a 5-star QB who's now it's their time. So based on those criteria right there, do they have what it takes?
I think they have enough to contend, but I think just those three things aren't enough. I think at the national level, if you go to the fourth and fifth, to have the defensive tackles, like when you watch Georgia, when they have a Jalen Carter, when they have who is the guy that went to the Eagles? Jordan, or the big guy.
No, you're on the right track. I'm trying to think of his name right now too. His first name is Jordan. Jordan Davis.
Jordan Davis. I mean, the guy was an absolute freak of nature. When they had those type of defensive tackles that literally just blow up the entire offensive line, it changes the game. So
it does.
At that
but
level,
you're also
you
talking
need
about
those
an
guys.
otherworldly defense and otherworldly players at that position. Defensive tackle, like you don't have to have the guys that are that. In college football, you just need the guys that hold their own. Like, just
but
hold
you
the
go
line.
back
Don't
to
give up the gaps.
the difference between the SEC and all their conferences. Like, it used to be Bama, where you would see them and say those guys are just different. They're built different. Mm-hmm. And now it's true of Georgia. You're starting to see it in some of the other levels in the South. And Ohio State gets that a little bit, and now Michigan's trying to as well. The big boys in the trenches, I think, are what does it. Penn State doesn't have big defensive tackles, and they generally have had underperforming offensive lines. Right now, they do have, I think, the best offensive line of James Franklin's tenure. But another position that's not on the field, head coach. James Franklin might be the biggest reason I would say I don't believe in Penn State. But as far as players, I think that they're in a great position. The other position that needs to be said is your skill talent, whether that be your running backs or wide receivers. I think this is a down year for wide receivers for Penn State. They almost always have a guy that's a first-round talent.
Yeah.
You go to, what's his name?
Dotson?
Dotson. There was Kyle Hamler before him. There's quite a few guys if you go back. I'm kind of blanking on some names.
I think their top guy. I think technically their top guy last year was Parker Washington, and he's gone too.
Yeah, and he wasn't even a first-round guy. So I think they kind of have been on the decline a little bit the past couple of years, and that's a place that I think they're deficient. So we'll see if Aller is able to
elevate
live up
them
to a five-star billing without the first-round talent at wide receiver. It's kind of a similar issue that J.J. McCarthy is running into.
But did Georgia have first-round talent at wide receiver at all these last 2 years? I mean, the only one you could argue, I don't know how long remember what year he was drafted, but the only one you could argue is Pickens. But he was literally hurt the entire time. George Pickens was hurt the entire time when they won the title.
He was a first-round talent, but he didn't get drafted in the first round. I think they've kind of made do with a generational tight end. And they did have A.D. Mitchell.
Penn State's always got good tight ends, though.
They do have good tight ends this year.
Always has good tight ends. And I think the thing is, I would argue the top 3 running back rooms, especially the top 1-2 punch of running backs, exist in the Big Ten East. And there's a case that Singleton, I can't remember which one it is, and Allen are number 2 in the Big Ten. I think anyone who wants to unseat Corum and Edwards is a fool, and I would like to play poker with those people. But
I've been seeing those takes, but it's because it's a long off season.
But yeah, and like I said, you're getting the whole thing. Like you're getting that OSU thing where it's not good to praise Michigan now. Like the story is to say that they're not going to be what they are. But anyways, like if that running back room just controls it and they give Aller time, a great quarterback can make great receivers, right? I do think that can happen, and so I think they're very, very interesting. It's funny, like they've always thought, like it's like you said, they always had one really good wide receiver, but it's like who's the quarterback getting to him? Well, would you rather have one great wide receiver with above average QB at best, or would you rather have a great QB and just above average wide receivers at best, but knowing that a QB can throw them open?
I take the quarterback, but I think we're ahead of ourselves where Aller has a great recruiting profile, but we have not seen enough to just. I definitely am giving him a little bit of love. That like I am definitely talking about it more what if rather than it is right now. I definitely am taking more than what if take. I feel like everybody has kind of just assumed that he would be great, while also questioning Ohio State's quarterbacks. And I'm thinking to myself, these guys are like the exact same because you have 5 stars who haven't shown it yet.
Oh yeah, I would honestly rather have Kyle McCord than Drew Aller. I'm just going to throw that out there. I would rather have the guy throwing to Marvin Harrison Jr. in high school. Like, give me that guy. That's who I want. Because Harrison wasn't at first he was just his name. He was just his name, but then him and McCord teamed up, and that's when Harrison's recruiting ranking really started to go up. So I'm not saying McCord is our next first-round QB. I'd like to think we keep that trend going, but honestly, I would take Kyle McCord before I would take Drew Aller. Like, I will throw that out there. I would rather have McCord.
I think that take will probably age well if he's named starter, just based on his wide receivers. He's going to have better stats. But as far as talent goes, I think I like Aller just based on I love his size. The guy is really big, and he can move. The thing is, I just want to throw this out there. With Marvin Harrison Jr., you did mention that his recruiting profile blew up. Recruiting rankings, I think this is a perfect case of them not being perfectly accurate because Marvin Harrison Jr. is 6'4", 215 pounds or so, can run 23 miles per hour, which is insanity, by the way. His father is a Hall of Famer, and he was not a 5-star. This is craziness. I don't think that he just blossomed into the monster. I think he's been the monster, and yes, he was a top 100 recruit, but man, just with his name and his size and his ability to catch, you'd think he would have been a top 10, if not top 1 player in his class. I think sometimes these scouts think about it or overanalyze and think, well, he's not his dad. You're right, he's not his dad. He's faster, taller, and
he's probably better
probably
than his
just
dad.
better.
He's probably better than his dad.
Don't overthink it. But
it's going to suck when he goes to the Cardinals next year.
Oh, that'd be a good fit.
Well, have you seen this whole thing that the Cardinals are just tanking for Caleb Williams and then they're hoping the Texans suck? Because they have the Texans pick. So
right.
What if they take Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. 1 and 2 next year?
Well, that's a pretty good rebuild right there.
That's nuts.
But we're going to head ourselves. I'm just saying, with Aller, I do like the foundation. I'm not ready to crown him yet and say he's ready to lead them to a Big Ten title. I think that away game at Ohio State is going to be huge, but I don't know that I trust him. We'll see. Maybe he'll get there.
One thing
what
I
else
do think
what
about,
else you got for me?
I mean, the other thing I do think that sets up well for Penn State is their schedule. With where the teams are right now, like they always play Michigan, Ohio State, 1 at home, 1 on the road. As a Penn State fan, I would definitely want Michigan at home, Ohio State on the road. Like that's how I would want to play them because a lot of years recently, like Penn State has played OSU close in the shoe. Like Ohio State has not really broken Penn State in the shoe since 2015. That's the last time during the Christian Hackenberg era. So, I mean, with Penn State, I think the schedule sets up well for them. I do feel bad for Penn State that basically television is the ultimate authority in college football nowadays, that they cannot make that game a whiteout, that they have to play it at noon. Like that honestly, like to me,
Thank
like
you, Fox.
it's things like that have really showed you that college football really is in a different era now, that the controlling bodies are not the NCAA or even the athletic directors and school presidents. It is whoever gives you money is
ESPN
in control
and Fox
of college football. And yeah, I mean, it's bonkers that's not a night game. I mean, Michigan fans have. I think there are Michigan fans that started to believe in Jesus when they found out that the game was not the whiteout. Because that was
huge.
I mean, if that was the whiteout, that's your scariest moment this year. Even over playing Ohio State at home, the whiteout would have been the scariest moment this year.
It's generally been a house of horrors for Michigan, and vice versa. Penn State sucks in the big house, so it is huge for them. But also, not being a night game for a whiteout makes me think that Michigan can still take it, even if it'll be a close game.
Yeah, it's Penn State is athletic. That's the one thing I'll give them, is because for so long we used to say in the Big Ten is the reason why a lot of teams outside of Ohio State couldn't compete with the rest of them is because they don't have the same athletes. Like Penn State is athletic. Like their linebackers, defensive line, secondary, even though their offensive line is not the biggest, they've got two great running backs. Like they've got athletes. And so at college, sometimes, like I said, coaches can be great in scheme, but sometimes in college football, athletes just win games. And I think they have athletes to be able to go toe-to-toe. And I think Penn State's best situation is against Michigan is if they can somehow make it a duel of the quarterbacks, and Aller just proves that he maybe is this generational QB at Penn State, and then at Ohio State, if teams show that the run game is still not there, if you go on the road and you can establish the line of scrimmage and get the run game going, you can beat anybody. It doesn't matter where you're playing. So I do think it is likely easier that they beat Ohio State. However, I do kind of have a twist to throw in the ringer this year when we actually get to actual predictions later on.
We'll see if it's similar. I've got two of them I'm sitting on, and I still have I'm undecided as to which one I'm going to go with. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything else on the trial of Penn State?
What does James Franklin need to do for you to prove that he is the coach that got the contract? I know. So here's the thing. I know he has made these boneheaded things in decisions in the fourth quarter. However, I mean, when was the last time that Penn State was perennial? Like you could count on Penn State to go 10-2 just about every year. Like really since 2016, besides 1 year, you could basically count on Penn State to go 10-2. Like it was, you could rely on it. And to James Franklin's credit, like he has established a hard floor of Penn State. Mm-hmm. The problem is the ceiling might just be right above it, and they might just be what they are. But the one thing I'll give him credit is he has put a hard floor. Like the idea that Penn State would drop below 9-3, like I can't see that happening. Like maybe they lose to Michigan, Ohio State, and then they get one other game where they got upset by somebody. Because the Iowa game is always tough for them. But
when I think of James Franklin, I think of his press conference after a very close Ohio State loss, I believe it was Ohio State, where he says, "We are a very good football team, but the key for us is going from very good and even going from great to elite." And I think that encapsulates him as a coach. I think he is very good. Like you said, he's got a team that last year won the Rose Bowl. That's very good. Mm-hmm. But to be elite, you have to be winning your conference. You have to be going to the playoffs. And for him to get to that level, to be an elite coach, it's going to take winning those close games. Last year against Ohio State, it was a battle into the fourth quarter, and then Penn State literally just imploded.
Ohio State, all of a sudden, they felt like a completely different team, though. Like, Penn State took the team, and all of a sudden you just saw Stroud gutting to Harrison Jr. and Ibuka and finding Cade Stover open. All of a sudden, the defensive line started mauling them, and then you just kind of lose sight of Travion Henderson. All of a sudden, he bursted a 45-yard touchdown run. I do think that game was a little situational, but the counter argument to me that is, I mean, if Harbaugh can go from 2020 to 2021, why can't James Franklin make that same move when Harbaugh had been who he was for 5 years? It's not like Harbaugh had him for 2 years and then year 3. Like Harbaugh was it year 6 or year 7 when it was year 7 when he finally connected the dots, right? And so who says that James Franklin can't all of a sudden finally connect the dots this time?
Well, what I'm talking about is a iconic play call in a key moment where, like, you go back to, I think of Nick Saban, the onside kick in the national title. My jaw hit the floor when they called that play in that situation and then perfectly executed it. Or another play, Jim Harbaugh, when they have this converted linebacker at running back, and they had previously been running him straight up the gut in short yardage situations. They hand the ball off to Kalel Mullings, and then he throws the ball on a 4th and 1 to our tight end. It was the ugliest play, but it gained like 20 yards, and it gave so much momentum. It really in a sense, kind of flip the script a bit. James Franklin needs to flip the script. If he is in a close game with Michigan and there's a fourth down play call where he has a great play, instead of, I think of that 4th and 5, where they literally just did a handoff against Ohio State at the end of the game, there needs to be some sort of elevation type play that elevates the team in that moment and then elevates him as a in-game coach, because there's so many of those moments you're like, what is James Franklin doing? And I think he's good, but he's not great yet. And you need to be great if you're going to beat Ohio State, if you're going to beat Michigan, especially this year.
Okay. All
right, so how about who's going to win the West? And maybe just why you think that. And does it matter?
That's the big thing. It's funny. Like, for me, I do want to put a little stock into Matt Rule at Nebraska, but they play Michigan and Ohio State this year. Like, whoever's going to win the West at minimum
some schedule help.
Is going to need schedule help, and they're going to have to be able to go 2-1 in their crossover games minimum. And so I do think Iowa is helped out most by that. They avoid Michigan and Ohio State. You know, they play Penn State early, yeah, and that might be Iowa. That might be a favor to Iowa, because it's probably Drew Aller's first real big game, and you know, Cade McNamara has been around. He's experienced. They got an experienced defense. There's a lot of guys, even though they're maybe playing together for the first time, you know, Cade's been to Penn State and won before. 2021, he won that game. He made some big throws to Eric All, who's with him in Iowa. So it's familiar territory for Cade, and Drew Aller is going to be could be in a potential scary spot. So I do think the schedule helps Iowa. It's going to sound silly to say this, but just because the West is so bad, I think you can't sleep on Illinois just having an opportunity, because I do think they have easily the best coach in the West in Brett Bielema. I don't think
I'll take Luke Fickell over Bielema, but I think he is.
I'm talking like proven in the Big Ten, and think about it. Like, Iowa should have won the West last year, or Illinois should have won the West last year. They should have. They fell apart, and they had some injuries and whatnot. I mean, they should have They had Michigan beat. And so I do think in the West, with just the difference in elite talent, I do think that's where coaching really comes in. And I think Luke Fickell is trying this whole philosophy overhaul that you made a reference to it early on. I don't think it takes off in year one. Like, Rich Rodriguez did not take off in year one at all at Michigan.
He never really took off.
But to be fair, he got better each year, though. I think they kind of caved at a moment where, because all of a sudden Brady Hoke took Rich Rod's players and went 11-2, won the Sugar Bowl, beat Ohio State, and so Rich Rod might have been trending up. And so Luke Fickell's going to make a bowl game, of course, but I think they're going to need a time. Like, I think Tanner Mordecai is okay, but Tanner Mordecai's had the privilege of playing against Big 12 defense and American Athletic Conference defenses, not Big 10 defenses. And even in the West, the defenses are still pretty good. And so I don't believe in Wisconsin this year. I think they're destined for an 8-4 season this year. And so I do think Iowa is the team that I'll pick. I want to pick Nebraska because I think they will have easily the most dynamic quarterback in the Big Ten West in Jeff Sims, who, I think that makes a big difference, but they've got Ohio State and Michigan, and I think that's going to hurt them. And they would have to beat Iowa, Wisconsin, and Illinois. They have to beat all three of those teams. Mm-hmm. They have to put them underneath, and I think they drop at least one of those games, and I'm pretty sure they play at Iowa, so I'm not giving them the game against Iowa late in the year. I think Iowa edges out Nebraska to win the West.
Well, I wouldn't even thinking of Nebraska at this point, but yeah, maybe Rule has him ahead of schedule.
The Jeff
Iowa
Sims
as well.
The Jeff Sims is the reason why. I do think Jeff Sims could make noise in the Big Ten West.
I'm looking forward to seeing what he's got. We've got, I believe, a game Thursday with Minnesota and Nebraska, so we'll see how much Jeff Sims is going to bring to that offense. I'm going Iowa. Betting favorites, Wisconsin. But I like what Iowa has with Cade McNamara. I think he's a good quarterback. He's not as good as J.J. McCarthy, but he's going to be way better than Stinky Petrus or whatever he was last year. And I even think that Iowa is going to reach their scoring goal this year. And if they do that with, obviously, that great Iowa defense that they have every year, they will be a formidable foe for everyone in the Big Ten except for probably Michigan and Ohio State, maybe Penn State. I think that Penn State game is going to be close, though, and there's a good chance they could even squeak that one out. So I feel good about Iowa, and I'll be watching them very closely.
Okay.
Who do you got on the rise this year? Maybe a player, or coach, or sounds like you're pretty high in Nebraska.
I see. I don't know if I can say Matt Rule is the coach on the rise in the Big Ten because it's his first year. Even though this guy is an established coach and he's actually been around forever, for me, I think Brett Bielema is the coach on the rise in the Big Ten with his program because, all of a sudden he took Illinois from but they were going, 2-10, 3-9 under Lovie Smith. Yeah. And to where,
they're real now. Yeah.
They were like, they were what? Were they 8-2 going to the Michigan game? Or were they 7-3? It was
but
either way, the fact that Illinois was 7-3, almost ranked, going to that Michigan game in Ann Arbor and almost won. They should have won the West. They had players drafted high and multiple players drafted in the first couple rounds. Like, I do think Brett Bielema is the coach that is on the rise, and I think he's making a difference in Illinois. I think they have a hard ceiling, and I think Illinois will be a program that becomes victim of the divisions going away in terms of their opportunity to compete for the Big Ten championship. I think they're a team that was relying on the divisions to have a chance to compete. And like if we didn't get rid of divisions and UNC and UCLA wasn't on their way, I think at least one time over the next 3 years, Illinois would probably find themselves in the Big Ten championship. And so I think they have a hard ceiling, but I think they're a program that's still trended up, and I do think it's because of Brett Bielema. So that's my coach that I would say is trending up in the Big Ten.
This is a tough one. There's a few that I would point to. I'm going to pick a player, and I'm going to be a homer. I think that we are going to see a very efficient and dynamic, which those two things don't usually go together. I think we're going to see an efficient and dynamic J.J. McCarthy this year. I think that watching him is going to be one of those almost can't miss television appointments because he's going to make plays that NFL scouts are going to love, YouTubers that like exciting plays are going to love. There's going to be comparisons to NFL quarterbacks that are going to upset rival fan bases, and I think that his accuracy is going to be improved. And so I think J.J. McCarthy is going to be on the rise. I'm not predicting a Heisman, anything like that, because of handing the ball off so much, but I do think the efficiency is going to really be something to take note of. My comp, and I'm not saying he's going to be this efficient, but going back to West Virginia, Geno Smith, he was incredible at West Virginia, where it just seemed like everything, like the ball just went where he wanted it to go, and he knew where it was going, and his wide receivers didn't have to do crazy stuff. Like, they would just run a slant, and they'd be open enough that he could fit it in that hole, and then they would just keep running. And Michigan's got athletes. They've got guys that have speed, and now that there's a little more comfort in the offense, I think it's going to be just a treat to watch. So I know that's a homer pick.
It is.
I am so excited about J.J. McCarthy.
For me, it's just so funny that that's how you see J.J. Because, I see J.J. as a great QB, but I see him as so much different.
You said Brett Favre.
Yes, literally. Like, for me, and I think any quarterback would love to be compared to Brett Favre, right?
Yeah.
But to me, I think that is like I think he's kind of a wild thing. Now he might be a little bit more controlled, and I think he's a smart kid. He's a smart player, but I mean he's got that Brett Favre in him. I mean even that TCU game, there was a few other balls that like he was throwing some dangerous passes.
Yeah,
A decent amount of the game. Now there was a few that, like Brett Favre did, he tucked them right in that small window and dropped them in that box. Like he's got that capability, but just I think because of who he is never afraid to take chances, and just every now and then when you take so many chances, one might not go your way. And so, I mean, if he becomes efficient, if JJ McCarthy became that Geno Smith efficient, then you're talking like he is up there in the Drake May, Caleb Williams category. If
I think he
gets
be
that,
short of that
that
category.
efficiency.
I think that he could be in a tier almost by himself, right below those two. The thing that kind of leads me here is JJ had that going. He had that efficiency in the first handful of games.
Well, when you throw the ball 8 times a game, that kind of helps you out.
Well, he threw the ball a little bit more than that, but he had
12,
about 80. He had about an 80% completion percentage through his first, I think, 3 starts, and then he kind of fell off as the season went on, and then he kind of got it back. And
well, they were on the. I think they were on the Blake Corum Heisman. I think Harbaugh really wanted Blake Corum to win the Heisman Trophy. I think he was really gunning for that.
To their deficit as they got him injured against Illinois. I think there should be more balance, and I think he's able to get that chemistry and momentum, and that efficiency I think should be a little bit more level. And yes, there will be those wild plays. He had quite a few of them, but from down to down, I think the majority of the plays are going to be slow down for him because he's going to know where he's supposed to go rather than I'm not sure what I'm seeing. I'm just going to trust my legs. I'm going to run around and I'm going to chuck it.
Yeah.
So I think that's still going to happen, but just maybe.
Yeah. I think what NFL. Less. I think for JJ to get in where you're talking like that below these, these guys, these top 5 QBs, for JJ to be that guy who a team could take mid first round, late first round based on how the draft goes, position need. I think what a lot of NFL scouts will want to see from him is I think they want to see him either be the guy that closes out the game or they win the game because of him. Mm-hmm. So I mean, Ohio State, he made all the plays to put Michigan in position, but Donovan Edwards closed that game out, right? The defense closed the game out. I think for JJ to get to that top 10 pick in the NFL draft, I think he's got to prove that he can close games out. And it's kind of a catch-22 because what Michigan fans are hoping for is we don't want that position. We want to just run the ball in the fourth quarter, and we want to just swallow teams with defense. So, and so that's kind of a catch-22, and that's where it's kind of tough. We fight that balance of we so badly want our players to get drafted high, but at the same time, as a fan, if I could pick first-round picks or national championship games, I'm picking national championship games. That's what we're all doing. Yeah. But yeah, he's got every bit of it, and just with Donovan Edwards back and Blake Corum back, unless they come out with the game plan to throw early, I wouldn't be shocked if in the first 6 weeks of the season, JJ is averaging less than 20 pass attempts a game.
I would be shocked if he averaged less than 20. I think he'll be hopefully more like mid-20s.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying I wouldn't be shocked. Because, I mean, your two most dynamic players on offense are Corum and Edwards. It's like it's not like you have those running backs, but you have Emeka Egbuka sitting on your wide receiver core. I know you love Roman Wilson. I do think Roman Wilson is a good receiver. But they just, like I said, they don't have that receiver who has to get their touches. Harrison has to have 10 targets a game. Egbuka has to have 8 targets a game. You have to get that. And so any game where Harbaugh can just run the running backs, because Harbaugh loves to run running backs into the ground. So
yes, he does.
If any chance where Harbaugh can do that, I think he's going to do it.
That's why I'm not talking about raw stats. I'm just talking about the efficiency, and then there's going to be the explosive plays. Yeah. So I think that he's going to have a better completion percentage, which was already good. I think he was like almost 64% last year. But we're going to see, I think, more touchdowns, and we're going to see just a guy more in control of the offense. I think he's going to be
that
dynamic.
part's true. Yeah, for sure. He will. I think he will have the liberty to call plays if he wants to. Like, especially if they're in rhythm, going quick. I wouldn't be surprised if he was looking at the sideline and he was making signals or saying things where he's like, "Hey, let's exploit that." I think he'll be given that freedom. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Who's your coach? Who has the hottest seat in the Big Ten?
I think it's pretty clearly Tom Allen.
You think that's clear? That's Tom
I think
Allen?
he gets fired. I would put money on him getting fired this year.
Have you seen his buyout?
I don't think it matters. Big Ten TV money.
$20 million.
Yeah, that's a drop in the bucket now with the new contract that they signed for the TV networks. If you aren't competing in the Big Ten, just move on because you have.
What's the expectations at IU? You don't think it's Mel Tucker?
No, because his buyout's more like $60 million, or probably 70 or 80 at this point. I can't remember when I think it was 2021. He signed a $95 million contract. I think it's going to go down by about $10 million each year.
But that's just boosters money though. That didn't come out of the athletic department though.
It's about half. It's still about half, and they still have to pay it.
Yeah, I don't know if they had a worse season, because it's not like they're doing anything great in recruiting right now.
They're still recruiting better than Mark D'Antonio did. It's just that Mark D'Antonio is a better developer of talent.
Yeah,
I really think that the baseline.
I think Mark D'Antonio had a good eye for the underrated talent.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, almost every single one of Mark D'Antonio's guys he developed they were Ohio guys that just didn't get Ohio State offers. Like, so for a while when Michigan was really good, they were recruiting the Ohio State guys that didn't get offer. D'Antonio found a way to just recruit the Ohio guys that weren't getting the Ohio State offers. That's kind of what
he was doing that in Ohio and in Michigan.
Yeah.
And all those guys really hit.
I mean, Cousins and Cook are both his QBs are Ohio guys.
No, Cousins is Michigan.
Are you sure?
He's from Holland. That's up by where I live. With Michigan State, with Mel Tucker, I think that they would be happy with 6-6, which is a low bar.
That's pathetic.
So I think that they will think that is part of the build. So I don't think he's going to be hot unless it's below that, which they have the talent to go 6-6. Mm-hmm. And the buyout's astronomical. So I'm not too worried about him yet, maybe next year. But I think that there's a lot of goodwill still from that 2021 season with the Peach Bowl win over a Pitt team that didn't start their Heisman candidate at quarterback.
Okay.
I think Tom Allen's getting fired this year unless they produce a miracle. And let me tell you, they're not producing a miracle. I went to Michigan IU last year. That game, I believe, was tied at halftime, or at least maybe a field goal game.
Okay.
The IU fans weren't even cheering. They weren't even excited. They had Michigan on the ropes, and they could care less. The energy around that program is absent. And I think with that kind of money, find a young go-getter of a coach, kind of like what Purdue is doing. We'll see how it works out with Ryan Walters, the DC from Illinois. Find someone that you believe can build, because Tom Allen tried and failed. And unless he turns it around this year, you got to try, dude.
In my mind, he didn't even fail. They just are what they are. I mean, it's a state that doesn't care about football except the Notre Dame people, but all the Notre Dame people who care about it are ones that aren't even the ones from Indiana, which, Indiana is the most boring state there is in the face of the planet as well.
100% agree.
And so I just, for me, I do think Tom Allen is getting fired, but I think it's just because they're like, all right, let's just try someone else. Let's see who else wants to go 4-8.
Yeah, but look at it this way. You spoke about Illinois before. Illinois was in a worse place as a program than Indiana was when they hired Brett Bielema.
They had a lot more history, though, than Indiana does. And there's better talent in Illinois as well.
There's a lot of talent in Indiana that just ends up going to Ohio State. They just need to recruit a little bit better. That's tough. I understand. But I think that they can be a lot better than they are now. I don't know what's wrong with them. there's a sickness that needs to be cured because Indiana should not be I mean, people are saying that they're going to go winless in the Big Ten. We'll see. Maybe they fool us and they improve, but I think they're going to be terrible, and they deserve better than going 2-10 or whatever they're going to end up being.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else that's in danger? I don't really think that. I mean, maybe
What
Greg
if PJ
Schiano,
Fleck? What if PJ Fleck has a losing season?
I don't think it matters. They had multiple 9-win seasons in a row for the first time since like the early 1900s. So I think he's safe. He's just got to maybe build a little bit more. They're starting a new quarterback, new offensive line. I think he's safe, and they're probably going to be bad this year. So I'm not really worried for him. Unless, actually, you know what? That's a good point. There has been some allegations about a toxic culture in Minnesota. So if the losses happen, maybe that toxic culture becomes a bigger issue.
Yep.
But I still think he's safe.
Okay. All right, well, let's kind of get to the final thing. Division winners.
I think we both have Iowa. Is that correct?
Yep.
So I think that it's only natural for Cade McNamara to get a rematch with his former team. So I've got Iowa facing off against Michigan, and it's going to be poetic, and it might actually be closer than it should have been, but I think Michigan is able to edge out Iowa in Indy.
Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
So Iowa wins the West.
Okay.
Michigan beats Ohio State.
Okay.
11. There's a three-way tie, 11-1.
Oh, yeah.
Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State. Penn State beats Michigan. Ohio State beats Penn State. Michigan beats Ohio State. And the tiebreaker is the best record between your crossover opponents. And Ohio State is going to sneak through.
Yeah.
Because we have Minnesota, Nebraska, and Wisconsin for our crossover games. And it's going to be like a 2-game difference. And so Michigan is going to beat Ohio State. But Ohio State is going to sneak in on that technicality after they beat each other, and Ohio State's going to get to the Big Ten championship and play Iowa, and if that
happens, I will throw up.
It's gonna be so interesting what happens. So it's so funny to me because, like I said, like I tried to play through the scenarios. I'm like I fully believe we're dropping to Michigan again, but I think it's so realistic that this happens too. Like, I think it's so realistic. Now, I think the toughest domino to fall there is Penn State beating Michigan. I think Penn State beating Michigan is less likely than Penn State beating Ohio State. But at the same time, it's not that unrealistic that happens. There's a really good chance that that's how it shakes up. I think the biggest key in all of that is, let's look at this scenario. Let's say that, okay, let's just look at Big Ten record, 8-1, 8-1, 8-1, and Ohio State gets through on the tiebreaker. But Michigan is 11-1, and Ohio State is 10-2 with a loss at Notre Dame. Michigan gets into the.
I would put Michigan in. Yeah.
Michigan still gets into the playoff. Isn't that wild? You could beat Ohio State, not get to the Big Ten championship, and still go to the playoff over Ohio State. Isn't that the weirdest situation? That, let's be real, there's a decent chance that's how it plays out.
And I would be, I'd be okay with that. So if we beat Ohio State,
if you beat Ohio State and go to the playoff, honestly, who cares about winning the Big Ten? For me, I don't see that as a good thing. Even though I'm predicting there's a chance, I'm not positive about it. You're telling me that we would lose to Michigan, play a who cares game against Iowa, and because of a Notre Dame loss, we might not get to the playoff? Like, we could beat Big Ten championships, and I'm like, we failed this year. Right. We failed. Like, for me, it's beat Michigan, get to the playoff. I'd rather be in Michigan's situation where we could beat Ohio State. Who cares about the Big Ten championship where we might get upset? And let's just get to the playoff and focus on that.
Yeah.
That's crazy how that could happen.
Does that mean that you have Ohio State as your fourth playoff participant?
because of that Notre Dame situation, I circled Michigan. I circled Michigan. I am actually,
Oh, man.
I'm not kidding you. Notre Dame, it was Navy. Don't get me wrong, but
They look good.
they look good. And if there's one thing that Ohio State can't do is stop the run, and that Estime kid is humongous.
He's a load.
He's huge. And not to mention that Devin Ford from Penn State, who was decent a couple years ago, is their third string running back.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. I dogged on Sam Hartman, but I'll give him credit. He was efficient, and he was playing under center. The fact that he made the transition, so I'm not going to buy into him just yet as a top 5 quarterback because it's Navy. But in terms of just looking as a matchup, I'm very worried about that game. I'm very worried. So you know what? I'm going to roll with that situation. Ohio State 10-2. They actually go to the Big Ten championship, but Michigan goes 11-1, and they get to the playoff. So I'll put Michigan in the playoff.
All right. So your official playoff is Michigan, Clemson, LSU, and Oregon.
And Oregon's winning it all, baby. Let's go, Ducks. Oregon's taking it home this year.
Finally, the Big Ten gets another national champion.
Now,
besides
honestly,
Ohio
I think
State.
that playoff, I think that's a Michigan LSU national championship game. I think that's what we'd be in store for, unless somehow they were 2-3. That's not going to be the 1-4 matchup. There's no way that's the 1-4 matchup. But maybe Clemson went undefeated in the ACC, and LSU and Michigan each had a loss, so they got ranked 2 and 3.
So I do have Michigan, as I said, winning the Big Ten. So that puts them into the playoff. I did on the SEC preview believe that there's no way that Georgia misses out on the playoff because they're going to be 12-0 going into the championship game. We talked about this a little bit. I think there's a possibility they could lose to LSU. So that's one scenario I'm kind of holding on to as a possibility. I'm not sure I want to go with it yet. I have Florida State coming out of the ACC, so they're my third participant. And the fourth spot is either going to be LSU beating Georgia or a second Big Ten team, which would be Penn State. If Penn State was able to go the 11-1 and not make the Big Ten championship game, I think
I thought you said Texas.
I was thinking about Texas, and you know what? I don't trust them enough. I think in the Big 12, like you described the hunted scenario with Michigan, Texas is that times 10.
Oh, especially with leaving the SEC.
Not just the teams, their own commissioner, Brett Yormark, in comments made to media, said that he would be there when Texas Tech plays Texas, and they better do what they did to Texas again last year.
I feel about the Red Raiders this year, too. I am so... Dude, oh my gosh. Like, I am so... Especially if that's like they each have one loss at best or even undefeated matchup. Dude, Texas Tech versus Texas could be a fire game this year. I live for games like that in college football. That's what makes it so great. Come on, Red Raiders.
When your own conference commissioner is saying he's cheering for you to lose, some weird stuff's gonna go down. So I think there's gonna be some games where there's a lot of holding calls, or maybe not a lot of holding calls, and maybe a couple weird reviews go down. So Texas, I think, is going to be really good. They were my pick to win the Big 12, but I don't feel great about it. So I certainly am not going to put them in the playoff, even though a lot of people do think that this is a great year for them to make the playoff. So my fourth spot, between Penn State going 11-1 and LSU potentially snagging an SEC championship. And LSU could be looking at having 2 losses, but beating Georgia and taking that last spot. I'm going to give it to LSU. And that way we have 2 shared teams in the playoff that we can kind of watch and see how accurate we are with our predictions. So I have Georgia, Michigan, Florida State, LSU, and you have Michigan, Clemson, LSU, and Oregon.
I do really hope this year that we can get back to a playoff where there's not 2 teams from each conference. I think we've had, is it 3 playoffs in a row? I'm trying to remember how many playoffs in a row now it's been where there's been teams,
Yeah,
or like
I
how
think it's
many?
been three.
It's like 4 out of the last 5 or something like that, where there's been 2 teams from each conference to
Right.
make the playoff. I think the only exception might have been 2020 because it was Clemson, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Bama. But there's been 2 years where Bama and Georgia both made the playoff. Michigan and Ohio State were both in it last year. I think there's one more potentially up there. So I would look forward, because like I said, the 2021 was weird because everyone knew Notre Dame like kind of snuck in just because they had more of a schedule. And Ohio State, literally, they were just like, well, Ohio State's only 6-0, but they're Ohio State. We'll just put them in anyways. Like, that's basically why Ohio State made it.
We'll change the rules of the
Like,
Big
we'll
Ten
just
so
change
they
the
can be
rules
the
for Ohio
champions.
State. I think even if Ohio State didn't make the Big Ten championship, I think they would have taken them at 5-0. Can you imagine 5-0 Ohio State?
I think they would have.
Yeah. So
Well,
I'm really pulling for 4 different conferences to get represented in the playoff this year. I really do want to get back. As much as I don't like it, LSU, Michigan, Oregon, and Clemson, that would feel like such a fresh playoff. Because, like, those are teams that never play each other ever. Like,
Right.
like those all feel like matchups that would just be awesome. I think I would love to see Michigan and Oregon and LSU Clemson as our semifinal games. I would
That would be
love
great.
those matchups.
I hate it that you potentially get 2 from a conference. So I would love to see the Pac-12 get a champion in there, or the Big 12,
Okay.
or even Notre Dame. I hate Notre Dame, but get me an independent school in there. Break up the monopoly.
Let's just put this out here right now, though, okay? Just because at some point we should be realistic. If you had to bet $1,000 on either 4 conferences get in, or it's Georgia, Bama, Michigan, Ohio State, where are you putting your money?
I have to, because there's scenarios where 4 conferences don't get in, but it's not those teams.
So it doesn't matter what teams. I'm just saying 4 conferences in general. 4 conferences each get a team into the playoff. Or you're betting
it's those 4
$1,000 on Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama.
I'll take the 4 conferences. I think
I don't know, man, because
to get all 4 correct is so difficult. Preseason we think we know what teams are going to be. Last year, no one said TCU would make a playoff. I mean, I still can't wrap my mind around how that happened. And every year, I mean, Cincinnati. They were right there.
So you got you were like the 4 that I just mentioned were in the top 5 last year, and probably were the best 4 teams. Like Michigan probably should have been playing Bama in their semifinal, and Georgia, Ohio State, I think was right as 1 and 4.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's most likely one of the 2 big conference teams, SEC or Big Ten, does get 2, but I wouldn't say I would accurately pick all 4, but without saying it would rather be 4. I hope it's 4 teams. That makes it more fun and it's more fresh, like you said. But that's our predictions.
I got one more thing for you before we're done, and you might have to browse at the schedule. Are there any Week 1 upset alerts that you have?
Well, I called it out on an earlier pod. I believe Toledo's playing Illinois.
Okay.
And I think that could be an upset alert.
I'm talking like an upset alert that gets national attention, though.
What do you got? Let me look at the schedule while you got say yours.
It's definitely a bit of a reach, but I look at this Virginia-Tennessee matchup, and
reach.
but like here's the thing, like Tennessee has got to prove that they're that team consistently, right? And I'm pretty sure it's a neutral site game too. I'm trying to find it. I'm looking up on the ESPN app right now. I'm trying to find it's at the Titans Stadium. So it's a neutral.
Okay.
It's a neutral site. It's not. Tennessee is the home team, but it's not in Volunteer Stadium. It's a neutral site, and Joe Milton is Joe Milton. What Joe Milton are you going to get? And if you get the Joe Milton that just doesn't put it together, who knows? Because Virginia's got a good coach. I do think Tony Elliott is a good coach. He was a coordinator at Clemson for the longest time. Like
I got a couple
for me,
you.
there's a lot of difficult ones to pick, but that is one that grabbed my attention.
All right, so one that you'll hate. This is on Labor Day, Monday. Duke plays Clemson.
That's a great shout. That is actually potentially, now that I actually look down at it, that might actually be the number one upset alert of a playoff contending team in week 1.
Well, it's at Duke.
State, yeah, I know. It's at Duke. It's a Monday night. That probably is actually the best one, because Florida LSU, that's not an upset. That's just two teams and the better team's going to win, right? That's not an upset.
Well, if Clemson loses that one, they have to run the table to make the playoff, like you've predicted. So that would be a tough one.
If they lose that game, I'm done. But part of me wants that to happen. I love that.
Oh, yeah.
What college football fan doesn't want to watch Duke? Because their quarterback, Riley Leonard, is getting a lot of love over the last couple weeks, too. So, go Devils.
Could have an interesting game. I'm not sure how it'll turn out. Colorado at TCU. That would be electric if Coach Prime immediately got a signature win over a ranked TCU who just went to the national title last year.
Oh, could you imagine if TCU went from playing to a national title to losing to a winless team?
You know what? I can picture it, although they are favored by 20.5 points, so it would be a huge upset.
It is at TCU. If it was at Colorado, I think there'd maybe be a chance, because there'd be all the buzz on campus with all the fans and the students. But, TCU still has that running back, that number 3, DeMarcado. I think he's back. So I can't see Colorado slowing him down.
He was able to run the ball against Michigan, and Michigan stopped the run every other game this year except against him and against Illinois, who had Chase Brown, who was a NFL draft pick. So I'd like TCU there, but there's just something, to Colorado with Coach Prime. Maybe it's going to explode in a fiery, disastrous way. Maybe it explodes in a awesome, electric way. We'll see. But those are my two maybe upset specials.
Ooh. Nebraska, Minnesota. How are you betting that game on Thursday? Nebraska
I don't think
at Minnesota.
I am. I don't have a handle on either team yet.
Minnesota's a 7-point line.
Oh, that's gone down. Last I saw it was 7.5.
So they're daring you to take Nebraska. They are daring you to take Nebraska.
I don't feel good about either side, so that's probably one I'm going to sit out, or maybe just throw some pocket change at it for fun. But I don't have a lean either way.
Will you have two TVs going at the same time for Florida, Utah, and Nebraska, Minnesota on Thursday? They both kick off at 8, because I will.
I'll have to have the TV and then the laptop, because I only have one TV in the house. But the TVs will be going. I'm already excited for Thursday. I'm a sicko. I can't wait for Friday when Central Michigan goes to play the Spartans in East Lansing.
See, I just want to bury your head in dirt when you say that.
It's one of those regional things where when Central plays Michigan State, things can get screwy. And as a Michigan fan, I love to see it. So cheering on the Chippewas.
I'm watching Friday. You know what I'm watching on Friday night?
What's that?
Miami versus Miami.
Oh, yeah. The battle for who's the real Miami.
Oh, if Miami, Ohio wins that, I'm getting a Red Hawk jersey. No doubt about it.
A lot of college football coming up. The next time you hear our voices, we will be reacting to games, and we will be talking about the games to come. So no more of this off-season prediction stuff. The real season is upon us. So we thank you for sticking with us through this hour and 45-minute pod. We had a blast. We hope you did too. So for Cody and myself, that was Football Frenemies.